All right. I'm not nervous at all. All right, I'm just going to read this straight off the page. So, whatever mistakes is in here, that's in there. So, yeah, hopefully this will go pretty smoothly. And, well, I suck at reading. But, anyways, here goes. So, this story is called Window. To whomever it may concern. My name is Robert, and I'm writing this down just in hope of getting it out of my head. Maybe you believe it, or maybe you don't, but here it is. I was born and raised in Stockholm, Sweden, where me and my girlfriend Anna now both live. But when this story was taking place, we were visiting Finland. We had gone to visit the girlfriend's family and get a break from our busy city life. Our trip there went very smoothly, an hour by plane, up and down, then we had arrived. I always loved coming to this country, and especially this far up where nature still is an overwhelmingly large part of the land. Green, thick trees, and that fresh air that you just can't breathe in any other part of the planet. When we landed, we were picked up by my girlfriend's father, a tall, former military police but now retired, but still more fit than me all day. He waited for us inside the very tiny airport and drove us straight home to Anna's grandmother for a quick coffee. This was another place I loved visiting. Anna's gran was one of the most fun and dirty old dames I knew, and she was always very happy to see both of us. And she was always very in my face with how much she loved that me and Anna had found each other. Compared to Anna's dad, that never really let me feel like I could relax around him. After about an hour or two, it was time to move on, and I really felt sad having to leave her alone in her large old house. The destination after was to a house that was far from all city life deep in the Finnish primeval forest. Really magical when you come from the big city where every bastard is stressed out and it is never really quiet. We turned off the highway and drove for an eternity in the dense, thick forest. I dozed off, then woke up, took a proper nap, woke up, and we were still far from our destination. Finally, we arrived at the house out in the actual middle of nowhere. No one has lived in this house for several years, said Anna's dad, as we turned into the overgrown road and then front yard of this old house. The house was apparently owned by Anna's estranged uncle. One day, he had just decided to disappear from the face of the earth. This was not at all strange, as he apparently always was a person who preferred his own company. Therefore, this house had been the perfect thing for him, isolated from the rest of the world in his own little paradise. But as I said, he had just up and disappeared one day, like he had gone up in smoke. And now, after so many years, he had been declared deceased. So now we, Anna and I, would be here overnight to get some peace and quiet. The next day her father would pick us up again for new adventures in their hometown and then sleep at his house for the next 2 nights. But now we would spend the night here to get away from the stress and bubble of all of the real world. Plus break in the property so the house was not just standing there unused. The silence felt thick around us when we got out of the car. Really noticeable, like a thick fog but not at all misty. Or maybe like the feeling that we were watched in some way. A shiver curled up in the nape of my neck. I shook it off quickly, trying not to let the negative thoughts take hold. Just focus on the fact that we actually get this hidden paradise to ourselves for this one night. We lifted our bags into the house while Anna's father started the wood-fired sauna for us in the bathroom. We had a couple of beers, ate a little, and then jumped into the sauna where we just enjoyed each other's company out in the now pitch-black, dead, quiet nature. Since it was winter-ish, it made the forest even darker and more quiet, so we enjoyed every second of being in this lovely little bubble of ours. After the sauna, it was time for dinner, more drinks, and just a nice time with father-in-law before he left us for the rest of the evening. When, shortly after the meal, I went to the toilet to pee, I thought I saw something. The house had only one bathroom, and it was on the ground floor of the house. In that toilet, there was a large floor-to-ceiling window that looked out onto the rough, wild nature in the backyard of the house. I still get a little jealous of how nice it was there. I stood there a long time and just enjoyed the openness out there on the other side of that big window. It was so dark that you couldn't see anything other than the nearest branches. They looked like hands trying to warm themselves in the light from the house, calmly swaying in the mild breeze outside. Then, all of a sudden, one of the trees moved. Not that it was moving in the wind, but it was like moving. Into the forest, it disappeared as if to hide in the darkness of the woods. It scared me so much that I jumped up and gave off an unconscious little scream. I stood staring as if mesmerized by the darkness, trying to see if anything else was moving out there. When I thought "What's going on in there? Are you okay?" Anna's father had heard my little howl. "I'm going to start moving now," he said. I blinked, quickly washed my hands, came out, and thanked him so much for everything he had done for us. We followed him out to the car, and I felt I had to ask. Was there actually no one else living here in the area? He said that everything lived around us out here. Then he grinned and said, "No. Out here you are completely in the womb of nature," and put his heavy hand on my shoulder before he jumped into the car and drove away. It was now about 8 o'clock, so we went into the house, sat down with a whiskey in front of the open fireplace, and continued to enjoy each other's company. It's often said that one's partner is the one, but with Anna, it was actually true. 3 years into the relationship, and I just kept falling more and more in love. Anna is the great love of my life. After about an hour of total coziness in front of the fire, 3 loud knocks were suddenly heard on the front door. We both jumped in shock. "Did he forget something?" Anna said, looking confused. I got up, went out to the front door, and opened it. I was met only by darkness and silence. "What the hell?" I said out loud. At that very moment, I heard Anna scream from inside the cabin. Her scream made me terrified. I ran to her without blinking, and in the middle of the house, she now stood completely pale with both hands in front of her face, shaking her head. I asked what had happened, and she couldn't give me a word. She just stood there in complete shock with her hands over her face. "Please, darling, you have to tell me what happened," I begged, and I held her close. She was shaking so much that even I started chopping my teeth. After what felt like an eternity in my arms, she finally whispered. She smiled at me. As soon as she said those words, she began to cry. And just at that moment, I realized that I did not close the front door when I ran to her. And at that very moment, we heard the front door close. We both now stood completely still, listening so intensely that it burned in our ears. I didn't even dare to breathe. Everything was completely quiet. We couldn't have imagined this. We both heard the knock on the door clearly. And even though I did not see what Anna had seen, I know my girlfriend well enough to know that she was not fucking around. On the contrary, I've never seen her that scared before. I've never actually seen any person that scared in my entire life. But that fear made me start moving again. With the adrenaline rush, I told Anna that I had to take a look through the house and see if anyone had entered or not. Anna woke up from her shock and grabbed me by the arm hard. "Don't leave me, Robert." Her smile. "You didn't see her smile," she said in a tone that went from sobbing to purely horrified. She started crying again and held me tight. She was still shaking all over, and I said I would never leave her, no matter what happened, gently stroking her back. But we couldn't just stand there and wait for something that might not come either. In fact, it could have only been the wind slamming the door too. "I'm calling Dad," said Anna with new energy. She picked up her phone, but, of course, it had no connection in the middle of this thick forest. I picked up mine too, just to confirm the same thing. It was all dead. We decided to take action and walked slowly up and peeked around the corner, carefully surveying the kitchen. It was empty. I immediately went for the biggest knife I could find, and Anna did the same. To be honest, I was probably more scared when I took the knives than before we took the knives, but I would rather have a weapon of some kind than just stand there empty-handed if there was actually some fucking maniac running around the house. So, good days. I started by opening the front door and looking out again. It was completely quiet and dark, just like before. I slammed the door hard so that the windows rattled. I locked the door in hope that it might scare the intruder a little, and maybe that we get like an upper hand over the fear that I had in the pit of my stomach. Slowly, we went through every piece of the house and only became more and more scared for every room and corner that stood empty. She will be in the next room. Empty. She's gonna be in the next room. But no, nothing. The house was completely empty. After we combed through the whole house 3 times and really made sure that there was no one there, we could finally breathe again. After a while, even Anna began to doubt if what she had seen was real or not. Maybe I fell asleep and just dreamed. It just felt so real, she said. I took the opportunity and asked her the burning question in my head. What exactly did you see? She tried to explain. I don't know for sure. I thought I saw a face outside the window. I think it was a woman, but it was so dark outside. I asked her why she would react that way if it was just a woman. Maybe she was in need of help, like a lost traveler or something. She continued, now becoming more frightened again, but trying not to show it. No, there was something off about it. But the worst thing was that face. The face. It had no eyes. It was just black cavities. Her voice had begun to rise, and Anna began to cry again. Her smile, it was just so fucking uncomfortable, like she knew something I didn't. A genuinely nasty grin, and she slowly kept coming closer to the window. Everything went so fast, and then you came, and she was just gone. Maybe I'm starting to go crazy or something, she said, putting her hands to her face, shaking her head again. If you were crazy, you wouldn't think you were going crazy, I said, hugging her and kissing her on the head. It was now 11:15, and I suggested that we just try to get some sleep. Anna reluctantly said yes, so we both went to bed. It was of course difficult to fall asleep, but in the end, Anna fell asleep in my arms, and shortly after that, I fell asleep too. I had terrible dreams. What I remember was standing in the middle of the woods. It was day, or at least bright. Anna was standing there with her back towards me, and I had gotten my feet stuck in the ground, and I was slowly sinking, and I couldn't get loose. I tried to scream, but I couldn't even make a sound. But the worst part was that Anna just stood there, completely motionless, and looked out into the woods in front of her. I continued to sink deeper, and it felt like my whole body was being torn or chewed to pieces by several mouths with icy teeth beneath the ground. When I was almost completely engulfed with earth now covering my mouth and nose, Anna's head slowly turned towards me. She had a horrible expression. She had a crazy wide smile, and her eyes were wide open, like a completely fucking crazy smile. My body was torn apart, and then everything just became dark and cold. I sat up with a jerk, completely soaked in sweat, nearly doing a fucking backflip. Anna lay completely motionless and did not notice me and my flapping around at all. I sat there in bed, staring out the window into the darkness, just trying to get my heart rate down a bit so I could fall back asleep again. And that's when I heard a strange rasping sound out on the facade of the house. I listened so intensely that my ears hurt, and then it just became quiet. Old houses in the middle of the forest have a tendency to make strange noises, so I let it go. Until it started again. More rasping, and a sort of drag against the wall outside the window. I felt the panic starting to creep in, and I began to have trouble breathing. The sound continued outside, getting louder and louder, closer and closer, until it sounded like it was right by the window, when it became quiet again. Absolutely silent. I lay motionless and stared out the window with the knife now hard in my hand. I didn't even dare to blink. It felt like an eternity of numbing silence. After a while, I started to be able to catch my breath again, and I felt the calm slowly starting to come back, but my eyes still glued to the window. Then, all of a sudden, something broke the black frame I was staring at. Something that rose very slowly outside the window. It was the top of a head, slowly rising up, higher and higher up, becoming increasingly more clear. I was so scared I was paralyzed. No matter how much I wanted to take Anna and escape, I couldn't. My body refused to move. I just sat there staring at this thing creeping up past the windowsill. Now the eyes crept up, and to my horror, there were no eyes. Only black fucking holes staring straight at me. The window was upstairs, so it had to be at least 3 meters above the ground, and this head still continued to rise higher and higher, staring at me there in bed where I felt completely defenseless. The pale face without eyes continued to rise up out there in the dark, and then it got even worse as the face spread out into a wide, horrific grin. Only the mouth smiled, though. Everything else was as stiff and dead as a porcelain doll's face. Yeah, that's exactly what it looked like. A porcelain doll without eyes. A hand consisting of long, unnaturally narrow fingers gently opened the small window, and it began to eel in, limb after limb. I was still completely paralyzed by sheer horror. First came an arm, then a leg, but all joints looked to be like almost boneless, or a snake or a worm. I was locked in eye contact with this thing that was coming towards me, towards us. I let the panic take over. I raised the knife to attack, but the knife, it was no longer in my hand, but on the nightstand, and the creature stepped in and opened its wide, smiling mouth. The stench from the growing gape was suffocating, like if you leave a pair of pig's feet in the sun for a week. Just sweet, rotten meat, or the stench of death. I woke up with a jerk so hard that I almost threw Anna out of bed. What's happening? She screamed and sat up in bed, preparing for everything. It was just a dream. It was just a dream, I said, breathing as if I'd just run a mile. Anna started sobbing quietly and said she just wanted to go home now. I comforted her as best I could, and around 3 o'clock she fell asleep again. She'd always been good at falling asleep. At this point, I needed to pee so much that I was about to burst and had to go down to the house's only toilet in the bathroom downstairs. How can you not have peed once since we came here? I whispered to a completely knocked out girlfriend who now did not even notice that I was moving. I stepped up carefully and walked as quietly as I could just down to the toilet. My body vibrated with shivers, both because I needed to pee, but also from my goosebumps that screamed to my body, "Just fucking escape!" I didn't dare to light a lamp, as that would definitely attract whatever it was out there. Between each step I took, I listened intently for sounds I did not recognize, but it was completely quiet. Too quiet. Too quiet. When I came down to the ground floor and finally approached the bathroom door, I could feel a weak, cool breeze at my feet and immediately came to think of the large window inside the bathroom and what I forgot I thought I had seen moving around outside. My stomach turned in fear when I realized that I actually never checked if that particular window was locked when we had been searching through the house. To be honest, I didn't think it was a window that could be open, but now the window was. Without a fucking doubt, the window was open. A faint but strange smell crept forward with the cool breeze under the small crack beneath the door. A musky, wild scent as familiar as it was unnatural, like an old hunting lodge with rotting meat in it. The fucking knife! I had forgotten to bring the fucking knife from the nightstand. My eyes started to sting as I tried to hold back my tears, and I peed myself. The liquid quickly dripped through my underoos, landing on the quiet wooden floor like pieces of metal on concrete. The scent became even stronger now. Something was moving in the bathroom, and I thought I could hear a choked giggle or laugh. A child, maybe? But more like an old lady pretending to sound like a child. It was so goddamn fucking bone-chilling creepy. Panic kicked my adrenaline into high gear and I ran like lightning to the nearest chair, which I threw against the bathroom door, blocking the handle just the moment the handle started bending down. The chair stopped the handle and the door remained closed. It was moving more intensely and harder now, but the chair stood as if it was bolted to the floor, and it was going nowhere. I started crying for real, and I didn't dare to move. What was I supposed to do? I thought of Anna, who was completely unaware of what was happening up there in bed. I have to protect her at all costs. She's the only thing that matters. The handle stopped moving, and I could clearly make out the sound of something heavy being dragged out of the bathroom. The air became lighter, as if there was a pressure in the atmosphere around the bathroom, and all at once, the awful smell subsided. I could finally breathe normally again. I wiped my stinging eyes, turned around to run up to Anna again, and there it was. Outside the kitchen window she stood, or whatever you want to call it, and looked at me, just like in my dream. And just like in my dream, that bloody smile spread across the blue, pale, doll-like face. This was absolutely no crazy blind woman I was face to face with. This was a tall, dark, slender creature with bony limbs and a back that was bent in an unhumanly strange angle. The face was exactly like I had dreamt. It did not look alive, but still was somehow. The eyes were not there, just black holes in the pale, doll-like face. It looked like the thing was wearing a living mask. Something that it may have created to be able to fool lost people in this ancient old thick forest or something. The creature gently rocked closer to the window with its black holes locked in my tear-filled eyes and finally pressed its fake face against it. It tapped the window a little lightly with its long, bony finger and smiled. Then slid down below the window frame completely out of sight. And there I stood, half naked, with piss-soaked underwear, more scared than I thought possible. I couldn't move. I must have stood there staring for several hours out of that kitchen window, because all of a sudden I saw the light starting to rise over the treetops. It had finally become a new day. I continued to just stand there in my pool of piss, looking at the light, now crying again. Maybe out of gratitude for the light, or just that the shock had subsided a bit, I don't know. But I still didn't dare to move. I couldn't move. I was sure it was still out there under that window, in the kitchen, and if I moved, it would come in and peel our skin off us alive, and then use our dead faces as new doll-like masks or something even worse that I can't fucking imagine. Many hours later, Anna came down the stairs and found me standing there. "But my God, Robert, what are you doing?" I heard the panic in her voice as she tried to shake me awake. My body was icy cold and stiff as a statue. I couldn't move. I still couldn't move. Anna took her phone, which now obviously worked, called her father, and then 112, and after that, I can't remember anything more. I don't see Anna that much anymore. She visits me once a month, or maybe it's once a year. Everything has become a big mush of time. I no longer know if we were actually out in that cottage in Finland, or if everything had just taken place in my head. But here I am, now sitting, staring out the window for days on end. They call me catatonic and say I'm in some kind of half-awake coma. I get fed, washed, and well taken care of here. There are not many things I know anymore, but I know that that thing is still out there. Maybe right out here. Right where I can't see it. Right beneath this window. Ba-ba-da-bum. Alright, so that was me reading my long-ass fucking story called Window. I know, very cliche, but I wrote this in February of our year 2020, and it was pretty much just me being bored in Finland when we went to visit Anna's family. So I wrote this whole story just down in my phone in notes, and I just want to say thank you guys so very, very much for letting me read this. I know probably all of you have fallen asleep by now, but if you managed to make it through, I would love to get your feedback on it, and if you like it, then who knows, maybe I'll write some more, and maybe you'll hear some more bullshit. But yeah, with that said, I think let's move back into actual Sketchbook Heroes territory and keep derailing the fuck out of everything that we do. So again, thank you so much. This has been Rob reading Window, and hope you didn't piss yourself. So have a good one. See you in like a second when I am back in the studio with Ilias. Toodaloo, motherfucker!